I just want what's best for you. This was my mother's mantra, repeated so often throughout my childhood that it became the background music of my life. It took me 27 years to understand that what she meant by best was her vision for me, not mine, a vision that required me to bend and contort until I no longer recognized myself. My name is Rebecca, and this is my story of surviving my mother's emotional abuse and finding my way back to myself. I remember standing in front of the bathroom mirror at 8 years old, my mother's hands on my shoulders as she examined my reflection with a critical eye. "Your hair is so unruly today," she said, yanking a brush through my curls hard enough to make my eyes water. "And look at your posture. Stand up straight. No one likes a slouchy girl." I straightened my spine immediately, sucking in my stomach without being told. I already knew that would be next. It always was. "That's better," she nodded, her approval warming me despite the pain in my scalp. "First impressions matter, Rebecca. People judge you within seconds of seeing you. We have to make sure they see someone worth knowing." From as early as I can remember, my appearance was subject to constant scrutiny. My mother monitored my weight with weekly weigh-ins, restricted my food when she felt I was getting pudgy, and selected my clothing to ensure I always looked put together. If friends came over unexpectedly and found me in ordinary play clothes, she would smile tightly and say, "Rebecca hasn't had a chance to get properly dressed yet," as if my comfortable attire was somehow shameful. School pictures were particularly stressful events. My mother would spend an hour preparing me, curling my hair, choosing the perfect outfit, rehearsing my smile in the mirror. "Not too much teeth," she would instruct. "You look horsey when you smile too wide. Just a gentle curve. Yes, like that." I practiced that smile until my face hurt, and when the photos came back, she would analyze them mercilessly, pointing out everything wrong. A stray hair, a slightly crooked collar, a smile that didn't quite meet her standards. "We'll do better next year," she would sigh, tucking the photos away rather than displaying them like other parents did. The message was clear. I wasn't quite good enough, but with her help, I might someday be. If my appearance was important, my academic performance was absolutely crucial in my mother's eyes. She had been valedictorian of her high school class and graduated summa cum laude from college. Nothing less was acceptable for me. My earliest memory of this pressure came in first grade, when I brought home a math worksheet with a B+ at the top. "What's this?" she asked, her voice sharp as she examined the paper. "We had to do it really fast," I explained, already feeling my stomach tighten. "It was a timed test." "That's no excuse for carelessness," she said, pointing to a simple addition error I'd made. "You know this material. You were just rushing and being sloppy." She made me redo the entire worksheet at the kitchen table, timing me to prove I could complete it perfectly within the allotted time. When I did, she nodded curtly. "See, you're capable of excellence when you apply yourself. Don't settle for mediocrity, Rebecca. Not when I know what you can achieve." By middle school, anything less than an A became cause for concern, lengthy discussions about my study habits and additional tutoring, not because I was struggling, but because I wasn't living up to my potential. My mother volunteered at school specifically to keep tabs on my performance, cultivated friendships with my teachers, and compared my grades to those of my classmates with uncomfortable precision. Mrs. Davis mentioned that Emily got a 98 on the history exam, she would say casually over dinner. "What did you get again?" "A 94. I wonder what questions you missed that she got right." The constant comparison to other children, whether about grades, extracurricular achievements, or social status, became a fixture in our household. I was never quite measuring up, always falling just short of some invisible benchmark represented by whichever peer was excelling at that particular moment. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of my mother's abuse was her manipulation of my emotions. Expressions of sadness, anger, or frustration were met with dismissal or punishment. "Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about," she would say when I was upset, a phrase I later learned many abusive parents use. If I expressed anger, especially toward her, the consequences were swift. "Don't you dare take that tone with me," she would snap, her face hardening. "After everything I do for you, this is the thanks I get? Maybe you'd prefer I didn't care about you at all." This emotional blackmail was effective. I quickly learned to suppress any negative feelings, to present a pleasant, compliant exterior regardless of what was happening inside. By the time I was a teenager, I had developed what therapists later called a false self, a carefully constructed persona designed to earn approval and avoid conflict. The few times I dared to stand up for myself or challenge her decisions, my mother would employ her most devastating tactic, withdrawal. She would become cold and distant, sometimes refusing to speak to me for days. In a household where her approval was the currency of love, this silent treatment was unbearable. "When you're ready to behave reasonably, we can talk," she would say, leaving me to agonize over how to repair the relationship, how to earn back the connection that had been severed because of my inappropriate behavior. I became hypervigilant, constantly monitoring her mood, adjusting my behavior to maintain peace. I became an expert at anticipating her needs and desires before she even expressed them. It was exhausting, but it felt necessary for survival. What made my situation particularly confusing was that from the outside, my mother appeared to be a model parent. She attended every school event, volunteered for the PTA, maintained a beautiful home, and spoke endlessly about her dedication to my development. "She's just devoted to Rebecca's success," teachers would say admiringly. "She's so involved in her education." Friends would comment on how lucky I was to have such an attentive mother. "My mom doesn't even know when my tests are," they'd say with eye rolls. "Yours helps you study and everything." Even relatives saw only the polished surface. "Your mother sacrifices so much for you," my grandmother would remind me. Some children would be grateful for that kind of attention. This external validation of her parenting made me doubt my own perceptions. Was I just being oversensitive? Was this what love was supposed to feel like? This constant pressure, this feeling of never quite measuring up. By high school, I had developed physical symptoms of my distress: chronic stomach aches, tension headaches, insomnia. A particularly perceptive school nurse once asked if everything was okay at home after I'd spent an hour in her office with a migraine before a major exam. "Everything's fine," I said automatically, the well-rehearsed line springing to my lips. "I just want to do well. My mom has high standards." The nurse gave me a long look. "There's a difference between high standards and impossible ones," she said quietly. "Just remember that." It was the first time anyone had suggested that perhaps the problem wasn't me, that perhaps the expectations I was failing to meet were themselves unreasonable. The facade began to crack during my senior year of high school. I had done everything right, maintained a 4.0 GPA, served as student body president, competed nationally in debate, volunteered the requisite hours for college applications. I had applied early decision to my mother's alma mater, as she had always planned. When the thick acceptance letter arrived, along with a substantial merit scholarship, my mother was ecstatic. "I knew you could do it if you just applied yourself," she said, as if my entire high school career hadn't been an exercise in constant application. But something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling joy or relief, I felt nothing. Empty. The achievement that was supposed to validate all the sacrifice, all the pressure, all the perfection-seeking left me cold. Because it wasn't my achievement, it was hers. I had been so focused on being what she wanted that I had no idea what I wanted. 2 weeks later, I collapsed during track practice. The doctor called it extreme physical and emotional stress and recommended rest, counseling, and a reduction in activities. When we got home from the hospital, my mother was furious. "This couldn't have happened at a worse time," she said, pacing the living room. "Colleges can rescind scholarships if your performance drops. You need to pull yourself together." Something inside me finally snapped. "I don't care about the scholarship," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I don't even want to go to that college." The shock on her face would have been comical in another context. "What are you talking about? This has been the plan since you were a child. Your plan, Mom, not mine. I don't even know what I want because you've never let me figure it out." What followed was the worst fight of our relationship. She cycled through her entire arsenal: guilt, manipulation, cold fury, tears, threats, bargaining. When none of it worked, she delivered her ultimate weapon. "After everything I've sacrificed for you, this is how you repay me. By throwing away your future on some teenage rebellion." But something had fundamentally shifted. For the first time, I saw her tactics clearly for what they were. Not love, not concern for my well-being, but control. Control disguised as care, manipulation masked as maternal guidance. "I'm not throwing away my future," I said quietly. "I'm claiming it." I deferred my college acceptance and spent a year working and attending therapy against my mother's strenuous objections. It was the first major decision I had made for myself, and while terrifying, it was also exhilarating. My therapist, Dr. Chun, was the first person to use the term emotional abuse to describe my upbringing. I resisted the label initially, but she never hit me, I protested. She provided for me, made sure I had opportunities. She just wanted me to succeed. Success on her terms, Dr. Chin pointed out gently. And at what cost to your emotional well-being? Abuse isn't just physical, Rebecca. Constant criticism, emotional manipulation, conditional love, these cause real damage. Over months of therapy, I began to recognize the patterns that had shaped my life. How I apologized reflexively, even when I'd done nothing wrong. How I sought validation from authority figures. How I panicked at the slightest mistake, expecting catastrophic consequences. How I had no sense of my own preferences or desires because they had always been secondary to my mother's vision for me. I learned that my mother's behavior had classic hallmarks of narcissistic parenting, using me as an extension of herself, as a way to fulfill her own unmet needs and ambitions. This understanding didn't excuse the harm she had caused, but it helped me see that her treatment of me wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of her own unresolved issues. The most difficult part of this awakening was grieving the mother I had never had. The unconditionally loving, emotionally supportive parent who would have nurtured my authentic self rather than trying to mold me into someone else. This grief was complicated by the fact that my mother was still very much present in my life, still attempting to exert control, still unable to see the damage she had done. When I finally did go to college, a small liberal arts school I chose myself, our relationship entered a new phase. With physical distance came perspective. I began setting boundaries, small at first, and then more significant. "I'm not coming home this weekend," I would say. "I need to focus on my studies. I've already made my decision about my major, and I'm not going to debate it further. If you continue to criticize my weight, I will end this phone call." Each boundary was met with resistance, with accusations of ingratitude or cruelty. "I don't even recognize you anymore," she complained during one particularly difficult conversation. "You used to be such a sweet, considerate daughter." "I used to be afraid to disappoint you," I corrected her. "That's not the same thing." College became a laboratory for self-discovery. Without my mother's constant presence, I could finally explore who I actually was, what I actually enjoyed. Some discoveries were trivial but meaningful. I loved spicy food, which had never been allowed in our house because my mother couldn't tolerate it. I preferred loose, comfortable clothing to the structured outfits she had always chosen. I was drawn to creative pursuits like photography and poetry, which she had dismissed as impractical hobbies. Other discoveries were more profound. I learned that I valued authentic connections over social status, that I enjoyed academic exploration more than achievement for its own sake, that I had a capacity for joy that had been stifled by years of anxiety and perfectionism. I made friends who liked me for who I was, not for what I achieved. I dated people who treated me with kindness and respect, helping me recognize how skewed my understanding of love had been. I found mentors who encouraged my growth without attaching conditions to their support. Through therapy and these new, healthier relationships, I gradually developed what Dr. Chun called an inner parent, a compassionate internal voice to counter my mother's critical one. When mistakes happened, as they inevitably did, I learned to speak to myself with kindness rather than condemnation. "What would you say to a friend in this situation?" Dr. Chin would ask, helping me recognize how much harsher I was with myself than I would ever be with someone I cared about. The healing wasn't linear. There were setbacks, moments when stress or fatigue would trigger old patterns, when my mother's voice would drown out my own. But over time, those moments became less frequent, less overwhelming. I developed tools to recognize when I was slipping into old thought patterns and strategies to bring myself back to a healthier perspective. 7 years have passed since that pivotal fight in my parents' living room. I graduated from college, built a career I find meaningful, and created a life that reflects my authentic values rather than my mother's expectations. My relationship with my mother remains complicated. After several cycles of conflict and reconciliation, we've reached an uneasy truce. I maintain clear boundaries about what I will and won't discuss with her, what behaviors I will and won't tolerate. When those boundaries are crossed, I limit contact until she can respect them again. She doesn't fully understand or accept that her parenting was harmful. From her perspective, she was simply doing everything in her power to give me advantages she hadn't had. Sometimes I see glimpses of insight, moments when she recognizes that her approach may have been misguided. But true accountability has remained elusive. I've come to accept that I may never have the mother I needed, that she may never fully acknowledge the damage she caused or make amends for it. This acceptance hasn't been easy, but it's been necessary for my continued healing. What I can control is how I move forward, how I treat myself and others, how I break the cycle of abuse in my own relationships. Through therapy, supportive community, and daily practices of self-compassion, I'm unlearning the harmful messages that shaped my childhood and replacing them with healthier truths. That my worth isn't tied to my achievements. That mistakes are opportunities for growth, not evidence of inadequacy. That authentic self-expression is more valuable than external validation. That love shouldn't come with conditions. I share my story not to vilify my mother, but to reach others who might recognize themselves in my experience. Emotional abuse often flies under the radar, its damage invisible to outside observers. Many of us who've experienced it struggle to name it, to validate our own perceptions when everyone around us seems to see only a dedicated parent, not the controlling force behind closed doors. If my story resonates with you, please know you're not crazy. Your feelings are valid. The damage is real, even if there are no physical scars to prove it. And healing is possible, even if the path isn't always clear or straightforward. The journey to reclaim yourself after emotional abuse is challenging, but it's worthwhile. Beyond the pain lies the possibility of a life lived authentically, connections based on genuine love rather than control, and the profound relief of finally being at home in your own skin, your own mind, your own life. This is what survival looks like, not just escaping or enduring the abuse, but rebuilding yourself afterward, discovering who you are when you're not being shaped by someone else's demands and expectations. It's an ongoing process, but every step toward authentic selfhood is a victory, a reclamation of what should have been yours all along, the right to define your own life on your own terms. The most powerful realization of my healing journey has been this: the voice that matters most is finally my own.